This week's lecture is going to focus on historic color, where we got color, what the origin was, and how we used it. Artists invented the first pigment colors as early as 40,000 years ago, made by combining soil, animal fat, burnt charcoal, and chalk. They created a basic color palette of red, yellow, brown, black, and white. These elementary and naturally occurring colors are referred to as earth pigments. Iron ore yielded red and yellow ochre, as well as umber. These three pigments provided a color range of browns, reds, yellows, and oranges. Blacks came from charcoal and burnt animal bones. White came from ground calcium. Prehistoric painters learned that pigments pulled from natural sources, unlike those yielded from animal or vegetable sources, would not fade with changes in the environment. Because of this, it's believed that ancient man traveled to maintain a steady supply of earth pigments, so much so that near every prehistoric site, from Texas to South Africa, there were man-made trails leading to natural iron deposits where the ore was mined for use in art. The Egyptian artists used a palette of red, yellow, green, blue, white, and black. They mixed ground pigments with binders, usually animal glue or gum, and applied them over finely plastered walls. Among the artifacts found in the tomb of Tutankhamun was a small paint box filled with the remains of ground malachite, red ochre, and orpiment, which is a rich, bright yellow made from arsenic sulfide. Derived from plant sources, madder, an earthy red, and indigo, a blue edging towards black, were pigments used more for textile dyes, but would have also been part of an artist's palette. The Egyptians began serious color manufacturing from about 4000 BCE. They introduced Egyptian blue in around 3000 BCE. The hue will later be known as cerulean blue. Considered to be the first synthetic pigment, it's made from silica, lime, copper, and an alkali. Egyptians also employed azurite, made from a mineral relative to malachite and used through the Renaissance, and realgar, a highly toxic arsenic pigment and the only pure orange available until the advent of modern chrome orange. The Minoans are credited with inventing the fresco by applying earth pigments directly to a fresh lime surface. The Greeks' contribution to painting was the manufacturing of lead white, which remained the most used white pigment until the 19th century, when production was ultimately banned due to toxicity. The Romans made use of the pigments developed by Egypt and Greece. A mercury sulfide mineral known as cinnabar was mined in Spain and imported to provide Romans with the orangish-red pigment they called vermilion. It was extensively used in residential wall decorations, painted on statues, and worn as lipstick. The synthetic version used today is called cadmium red. Earth and mineral pigments continued to be used in the Middle Ages, but new greens emerged. A mineral compound called green earth was used by painters to underpaint flesh tones, and ground malachite and verdigris, a toxic, unstable hue derived from copper acetate. In the 15th century, egg tempera began to be replaced by walnut and linseed oil as a medium. These oils dried more slowly and made the paint more versatile, allowing artists to explore new depths of color and realism. The 19th century offered a huge change for color as synthetics were introduced to stabilize or replace existing colors. And new hues were developed, such as cobalt blue in 1807, viridian in 1838, and cerulean blue in 1860. These new colors came about as a direct result of the textile industry demanding new dyes. It took longer for the pigments to be formulated for use by decorators and artists. Since then, the history of color has been one of perpetual discovery, the invention of new pigments accompanied by some of the greatest artistic and social movements in history, from the Renaissance through the Industrial Revolution. As for the colors and their sources, red is found in iron-rich soil and first employed in prehistoric cave paintings. Red ochre is one of the oldest pigments still in use. Later, during the 16th and 17th centuries, the most popular red pigment came from a type of cochineal insect that could only be found on the prickly pear cactus in Mexico. These tiny bugs produced a potent red dye so sought after by artists and patrons that it became the third greatest import out of the New World after gold and silver. Raphael, Rembrandt, and Rubens all used cochineal as a glaze, layering the pigment over other reds to increase color intensity. A non-toxic source for red pigment, it is still used today to color lipstick and blush in the cosmetic industry. The food industry is also returning to cochineal red, as science is discovering that many synthetic reds are carcinogens. Now blue. Since the medieval era, painters have depicted the Virgin Mary in bright blue robes, choosing the color not just for its symbolism, but for its hefty price tag. Its iconic blue, called ultramarine, comes from lapis lazuli, a gemstone that for centuries could only be found in a single mountain range in Afghanistan. The cost rivaled the price of gold. This stone achieved global popularity, adorning Egyptian funerary portraits, Iranian religious texts, and the headdress of Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring. In the 1950s, artist Yves Klein collaborated with a Parisian paint supplier to invent a synthetic version of the famous ultramarine blue, calling it Klein blue. Explaining the appeal of the historic hue, Klein said, "Blue has no dimensions. It is beyond dimension." As for yellow, few artists in history have been known for their use of yellow, though J.M.W. Turner and Vincent van Gogh are notable exceptions. Turner so loved the color that contemporary critics mocked the painter, writing that his images were afflicted by jaundice, and that the artist may have a vision disorder. Turner used the experimental watercolor Indian yellow, a fluorescent paint derived from the urine of mango-fed cows, a practice banned less than a century later for its cruelty to animals. Turner also employed the synthetic chrome yellow, a lead-based pigment known to cause delirium. Van Gogh also favored this vivid hue for his sunflowers and starry nights. On to green. While the color evokes nature and renewal, green pigments have been some of the most poisonous in history. In 1775, Swedish chemist Carl Scheele invented Scheele's green, a bright apple green pigment laced with copper and arsenic. Cheap to produce, Scheele's green became a sensation in the Victorian era, even though many suspected the color to be dangerous. Here are two examples of Scheele's green being used. On the right, a William Morris wallpaper made green by Scheele's arsenic-laced color, and on the left, a Victorian-era silk garment dyed the apple green color of Scheele green. So the wearer had arsenic sort of seeping into their skin through the textile that was pigmented with Scheele's green. Of course, this led to people getting arsenic poisoning, which can lead to nerve damage, skin damage, increased cancer risks, as well as circulatory problems in the skin. So many people were getting sick from the use of this very fashionable color. French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte's bedroom wallpaper was Scheele's green, and historians believe arsenic poisoning caused his death in 1821. By the end of the 19th century, Paris green, a similar mixture of copper and arsenic, replaced Scheele's green as a more durable alternative. Paris green enabled Claude Monet, Paul Cézanne, and Pierre-Auguste Renoir to create vivid emerald landscapes. Paris green was also used as an insecticide and rodent poison, and historians believed its use caused Monet's blindness and Cézanne's diabetes. As for purple, I have finally discovered the true color of the atmosphere, Claude Monet once declared. It's violet, fresh air violet. The Impressionists adored the new hue so much that critics accused them of having violetomania. The purple shadows and lavender specks of light they favored owe much to a little-known American painter named John Gough Rand. In 1841, Rand grew frustrated with the messy practice of storing mixed paint in a pig's bladder and invented a more practical portable option, a collapsible tube made of tin, which is what artists use today. So in this image, here's our little pig bladders. And then we eventually evolved into very fragile glass tubes full of color, and then metal tubes, which evolved into the final invention of Rand's. This enabled artists to paint plein air, easily transporting their color to outdoor locations to capture impressions of the environment, and in turn led to the production of pre-mixed paint shades in tin tubes, such as manganese violet, the first affordable mauve-colored paint that meant artists no longer had to mix red and blue to produce purple. Black. The darkest pigment found in old masters' paintings is aptly named bone black, and it is produced by burning animal bones in an air-free chamber. On to white. Of all the pigments banned over the centuries, the color most missed by painters was lead white. Elizabeth I liked to use ceruse, a compound to whiten her skin composed of lead oxide, hydroxide, and carbonate. The lead, unbeknownst to her, was poisonous, and the hydroxide and carbonate combined with the moisture in her skin formed acids that slowly ate it away. To redden her lips, she liked mercuric fucus, with the lead and mercury seeping into her blood through the skin that slowly poisoned her, and she would ultimately die of blood poisoning at age 70. The 17th century Dutch method for manufacturing the pigment involved layering cow and horse manure over lead and vinegar. After 3 months in a sealed room, the material would combine to create flakes of pure white. While scientists in the late 19th century identified lead as poisonous, it wasn't until 1978 that the US banned the production of lead paint. Titanium and zinc would become the preferred additive to create white. In this slide image here, you can see lead white being very creamy and titanium white almost being a little bit gray. So with the banning of lead white, this kind of changed the way people painted, and it changed the way colors were rendered, because now we were using a gray-based white instead of a yellow-toned white. So that's a little bit about color, where it came from, and how we used it.